this concept of changing our stories. It gives me an opportunity really to talk about first who I am and how I came to be here. I did grow up in Grove Hall, family's there. First girl in the family to go to college, to travel, to do a lot of these great things that are taken as a given or for granted by many people. And it was amazing because growing up, especially in a neighborhood like Grove Hall, for those of you who are from Boston, it's an inner city community. It is a very challenged community in a lot of different ways, but it's also a community that's filled with a lot of beauty and a lot of wonderful people, right? However, given that, growing up there was a very strong sense that beauty, opportunity, all of the good positive things that people want in their lives or experience in their lives, it happens outside. You leave in order to get access to all of those wonderful things. And a lot of the conversations about opportunity and the changes that are happening in a city and things being made sure that they are available for youth and for folks who live in communities like Grove Hall in the inner city has to do with how do we give access paths away. So when I came back to Boston after having traveled and done work and looked at development and space and power and all of these kinds of dynamics in other places, when I came home, I realized that it had never occurred to me to actually work at home, to actually connect here. And it was part of that dynamic of the landscape and of the story that people tell about where you're from, the story you tell about yourself, and the stories we tell one another about what our path looks like. So it was really important for me to be able to come back here and to live again in an inner city community. Now I live in Bowdoin, Geneva, which has been described by some officials at various times as ground zero for a lot of the most challenging things that face our city. Now when I moved there, I grew up in Grove Hall. It's a 5-minute drive away, totally different place. Had no idea what this new community was all about, but I found a lovely street with lovely people and really fell in love with a certain home. So I'm in Bowdoin, Geneva, and I'm thinking about the work. And I realized that all of this conversation that I'd been having and being part of globally, all these conversations about urban sustainability and what our community needs and development and revitalization and the vibrancy of our cities, that there was a disconnect between what we were talking about in these theories, these models, these plans and policies, and what was actually happening in the communities, in the inner cities, in the places where I came from. Not that there wasn't fantastic work happening. There was wonderful work happening all over the map. But as a resident walking up and down the street, you quickly realize that these wonderful things, these initiatives, these events, these programs are happening behind walls, within structures that if you don't walk through that door, you have no idea what's going on. Now, another dynamic that I realized was going on is that the public space that exists, that languishes in a lot of these neighborhoods are blighted, are, if they exist, it's blight. It is, they become these containers, symbolic and literal containers of all of the things that are unpleasant about our city, or about our neighborhood. And so attending community meetings, talking to people, talking to neighbors, just being present on the street gave me a very different understanding of what all of this work and activity was about in real time, in the real world, on the ground, in communities. And so my organization, being a community-driven network looking at development, their neighbors, their folks who live in the communities, They are volunteers. They're cross-sector partners. It's the city. We started to pull together these conversations and opportunities for us to change the landscape. And we knew that landscape was powerful because of those stories that it tells about the people. It tells you, of course, where power lives, where beauty lives, where all of these things happen. So we decided to take on, in the first year, in 2012, about 35,000 square feet of public space. So we partnered with the city. We got control of these sites so that we could go in and actually see how we could change the landscape and bring people together in public space. Now, these sites create a lot of challenges. There are a lot of things happening in them that are, as I said, can be sometimes unpleasant. You walk past them, you don't look at them. They're sites you look away from. So what we wanted to do was to create a kind of collaborative alchemy. And I call it that because it has to do with people in the community tapping into the skills, the assets, the energy and passion that's in the community for changing the landscape. Because when you live there, you know how important it is to try to have a different kind of experience of your day-to-day life. And so multi-generational groups of folks came together, all different types of ethnic backgrounds, languages. We worked with carpenters and folks who rarely get to do work in their own communities. And we reached out to them and said, here's this space, 10,000 square feet of not challenge, but of opportunity, of possibility, and come and work with us and redesign the site. And especially the carpenters said, well, is there a set of plans? What did the architect give you? What are we doing here? We said, no, there's none of that. We're just going to go into the space. We're going to clean it up. The city prepared it and leveled it for us. We're going to go in. We're going to clean it up. We're going to build it. We're going to see what comes from the community. We're going to see what that conversation leads to, and we're just going to make it happen. And they said, okay, lady. And this is what we're going to do. So they showed up. And as we were there working and moving, people would stop. They'd pass the fence line and they'd stop and they'd lean and they'd say, what are you doing? I'd say, oh, we've decided we need something beautiful. We need a place to gather in our community. We decided, I live over there. Where do you live? And this is what we wanted to do. And he said, I'll be right back. I'm going to get my hammer. I'm getting my tool belt. And people came out and started to transform the spaces. And the process, again, was very loose, and one of the things that we knew was that the process mattered as much as the form. And in many ways, it mattered far more than the form. How this site took shape, right? We had these funny little structures which were sitting there looking very homely for a while. We weren't sure what they were going to be used from because we wanted that community engagement, that connection to dictate what happened here. And again, had all kinds of folks come out and participate. Kids who lived across the street, folks who were leaning out their windows started to show up, and we started to get a critical mass of activity and folks who were able to have that connection and agency and that experience. And we did all sorts of painting and landscaping, and we're using recycled materials and pallets to build structures and tables and everything like that. And as we were doing the work, the conversation about waste, recycling, resilient communities started to come up. So instead of leading with where we wanted to go in the destination, leading with this goal of how do we start a conversation around sustainability in our communities, right? It was just how do we go and be with community? How do we as community members connect with others to start to change the dynamic and create the conditions for having the conversation in the first place? Eventually, this, like a butterfly, just emerged, and it went from being a site that was moving along and trying to find its way in a very short amount of time, 5 weeks to get to structure, and then we came back in the spring of the next year, and within 3 weeks we had beauty. We had a meeting space. And again, one of our ideas was that we have to rush and get it done so that it would open to community. And from the first day being present, it became clear that communities is present, involved, they're there, they don't mind the mess. And we're creating this together. And that was something that started to give this site that had very little value in the community to become a real asset and to become a place of incredible value. So now we have the platform. Where do we go from there? Some of the other conversations that we started to bring in were about healthy food and eating. It was about jobs and platforms for entrepreneurship, for supporting the folks in the community who had little businesses. So we started to open the space, and they'd set up tables and do all kinds of work. And gatherings would happen. And so from the plantings with the school children and the seniors in the community who planted kale and cabbage and onions and all of these things, and the folks who donated books so that we had a book exchange, and the kids could come and the adults would come and spend time there, and the bike programs that started so that we could have fitness and wellness and all of these things taking place in this space. We have created a dynamic of fullness, of abundance in the community, so that new narratives can come out of this space and out of the experience of being there. And so, again, folks who were not involved, who didn't have a pathway to get involved, started to come and offer. We've realized there were raw food experts in the community, yoga instructors, people who wanted to come and do all sorts of things around clean energy, workshops, education, so that now we've created a kind of set of conditions that allow this conversation to happen. So we call it alchemy, or this sense of taking something of little value and turning it into something of great value. The site still needs its long-term development. It still needs millions of dollars of investment for it to be what it will officially be, right? As you build any building, this is how it turns out. But in the meantime, if you live in this community and you imagine one site like this, or within the space of a single mile, as we have along the Blue Hill Corridor, 15 sites like this, you see that there is an opportunity to dramatically change that landscape, to bring people into public space, to get that connection, and to have it become the venue for engagement, for innovation, for beauty, for all of these things. I love this image because it's from Google Maps, right? This is what Google tells the world your community looks like. And this was in 2011. In 2013, this is what the world knows we look like.